everyone. Welcome to the June 23rd edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Wilkowski as we are looking ahead to some weekend racing at Belmont Park. Our focus on this week's podcast is Belmont's Saturday late Pick-5 races 6 through 10. We do have one stakes race in this sequence, actually kicking off the late Pick-5. Race 6 is the Wild Applause Stakes, a pretty interesting race for the 3-year-old fillies going a mile on the turf. That's the only stakes race at Belmont on Saturday, though. After that, the rest of the Pick-5 sequence is comprised of some claiming, allowance, optional claiming, maiden races. So maybe it's not the most desirable sequence that we're going to handicap in New York over the next few months, especially with Saratoga starting soon. But some interesting races, some small fields, but I think still not races with clear standouts. They're not easy races to handicap, so we'll see if we can craft the ticket by the end. I haven't talked to Craig about his opinions yet, so we'll see if we're on the same page or can put together an affordable ticket for this kind of sequence. We did already discuss the Wild Applause Stakes, Craig. We did a stakes preview of that we put out on DRF's YouTube channel, I think, yesterday. So I know we had some agreement in there, but hopefully we diverge a little bit for the rest of the sequence.
Yeah, I think it's a decent sequence. The placement of the stakes race is kind of odd. I mean, this seems like a good betting race to me. Usually they get moved to the beginning a little bit when it's maybe a short field with a heavy favorite, but that's not really the case here. So, but whatever, it doesn't matter. It's in the sequence somewhere, and it seems like a good place to start because, as you said, I don't think any of these races are overly easy, and it's a sequence I'm pretty interested in.
I will say there are 3 races of the 5 in this Pick-5 sequence that are carded for the turf. Things are looking a little better for grass racing this weekend than maybe they were yesterday. We're recording this on Friday morning. It was supposed to be a total washout this weekend. There was a ton of rain predicted to come on Thursday. It never really arrived, and they got in all of the turf races on Thursday at Belmont. So far, it looks okay on Friday. There's more rain predicted later, and some over the weekend, but hasn't been as bad as it was initially forecasted to be. So hopefully things stay relatively dry through Saturday and we can get these races in on the turf, because those are really more of the interesting races in this sequence as we get into them. And let's start the discussion, Craig, with one of those turf races, the stakes race that we already mentioned, the Wild Applause Stakes. Race 6, as it kicks off this Pick-5, going a mile on the Widener turf for the 3-year-old fillies. There is one MTO in this race, but we're going to talk about it as if it's scheduled for the turf. I think that MTO would be pretty tough if this race did unfortunately come off the grass. There are some runners that I pegged as short prices on the morning line here, Craig, going out for some high-powered connections like Christophe Clement and a couple of Chad Brown trainees, so I'm not going to be surprised when all of those take some money in here. And all 3 of those are definitely contenders in this race, but I know both you and I felt this was one that was fairly wide open. Let's, though, start with the conversation of Breathaway, who I did peg as the morning line favorite. She hasn't run a bad race in any of her 4 starts thus far. She obviously handles a mile on the grass. The one turn of this race probably going to be fine for her on the Widener, because typically that's a kind of configuration that doesn't work against horses trying to rally from off the pace. She's just a horse that can be pretty pace-dependent because she's got that style where she likes to launch from the back of the pack.
And it's worked out a few times for her. She's gotten good trips the last couple time with fast pieces. My concern with her is not she's a contender, no doubt, but she hasn't run all that fast. There's others in here with better speed figures than what she has, and I'm always a little leery of favorites like this that just they should have some kind of edge on the field, in my opinion, before I would even consider betting them. I don't know that I totally toss her, but I think there are some others with some better credentials.
Yeah, I will say, one of the reasons I have her so low on the morning line is that she does look much more formidable on the buyer speed figures than the TimeformUS numbers, and I have to factor that in. I know a lot of people use the buyers as their primary speed figures, just moves a lot of money, and on buyer numbers, she's 5 points faster than everybody in this race based on each of her last 2 speed figures, so just something to consider there. But I kind of agree, Craig, that I wasn't thrilled with the quality of that Sanibel Island that she won, even though she was a decisive winner that day and came through with a really eye-catching late move. don't really think there was a whole lot behind her in that race. And then the Hilltop last time, she got the trip once again and was just second best to a Chad Brown trainee. That might be improving, but still, I didn't think that she was some standout in this race. So, I mean, naturally, you want to look at her two main rivals, the Chad Brown trainees, and, Liguria, she did win a grade 3 last year at Del Mar. I think we agreed when we did the stakes preview that that was not the strongest grade 3 event, to say the least. And she came off the layup and was just in a tough spot in the Edgewood. I'm not going to be too hard on her for that, though. She got a good trip that day and really couldn't capitalize on it, albeit against tougher competition. Though I think both you and I were a little more interested in the other Chad Brown runner, Tax Implications.
Yeah, I am for sure. I mean, Liguria, she's a filly who, as you said, graded stakes winner, but she didn't run a very good speed figure that day with a decent trip. Came back in the Edgewood, which was obviously a much tougher race than this. Ran a decent speed figure of a 106. But I just worry that trip was one where she just stayed on the rail the whole way, and it kind of looks like one of those suck up speed figures to me where she didn't do any real running. And I just wasn't impressed with her race that day at all, as opposed to Tax Implications, who we haven't seen her since October last year. She was already running a triple digit speed figure that day. Got a 101 when second to Implicated. And as you noted on the race preview, she was really green. And it seems like if Chad Brown can get her straightened out, I would expect a big jump in her speed figure, just as a 3-year old who it's now, we're closing in on July pretty quickly. So these horses can improve quite a bit. And she's been working out for quite a long time getting ready for her return. So I would fully expect her to be ready to go.
Yeah, she really didn't show that tendency in her debut. She was pretty professional that day at Monmouth, where she easily beat Liguria, who they were both making their debuts, and Tax Implications won that race by nearly 7 lengths. The Chelsea Flower, as you said, she was kind of lugging in through the stretch. Manny Franco took to the left-handed crop to try to prevent her from lugging in behind foes, and she was finishing at the end, but it just seemed like he couldn't fully ride her out to the finish that day. So there's definitely potential for her to do better if she can sort of get over that tendency as she makes her 3-year-old debut, and Chad Brown can obviously have these horses ready off layoffs. So I think the Tax Implications kind of is the horse to beat in this race, just based on her overall potential. Though I know we were looking at some others in here, Craig, one in particular that we both landed on in this race, and a horse that I did peg as a bigger price on the morning line. I guess we'll see how she ultimately gets bet, but the number 4, I'm Just Kidding, I think she has to be a decent price in this race because she's just coming out of some weaker New York bred allowance races, and those horses typically don't garner that much respect when they move up to open company races like this, especially trying a stakes race. But I think that I'm Just Kidding has actually faced some decent horses in those New York bred races. Fleet Footed, who beat her 2 back. She has now won 2 in a row. Seems like an improving horse for Joe Sharp. And last time out, that was a fast race going a mile and a 16th. And I'm Just Kidding did not have an easy trip that day. I know that she was disqualified for bumping in the stretch. She getting bumped off stride a little bit. Debatable whether she should have been taken down, but it was actually the early part of that race that I give her a bigger excuse for.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I'm Just Kidding was taken down, but yeah, she looked pretty good. I mean, she was put up, right? I'm
Yes,
Just
yeah,
Kidding.
she was put up on
Yeah,
DQ.
right. She was put up, but that result isn't what influenced me to really like her. And here, everything that I like about her happened on the first turn, where the pace was really fast. All the fractions are in red. The opening quarter mile was a 155 TimeformUS speed figure. She was up pretty close, and then she made a pretty bold move to get right up near the lead, in the still red fractions, and was wide. And just I liked everything I saw, and it's understandable that she wasn't able to get by the horse who finished first that day, given the trip she had. And I just liked everything I saw, and I think she's much better than the number she ran. We gave her a 106. It was knocked down a little bit. There's a lot of horses in this race that are knocked down a little bit because they were in races with fast paces that kind of helped the final time out more than usual. So you can still see that in the PP. She had a 111, or the race had a 111 final time figure, and her TimeformUS speed figure is only 106. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if she could improve to over a 110 here.
Yeah, and you might say that race came out of nowhere, but she had had some excuses in her prior turf races. She did not get the right rider trip in that Miss Grillo last year when she had the speed to be more forward, but she was, for whatever reason, rated off a slow pace that day that was dominated on the front end. And then two back off the layoff in that Aqueduct turf sprint. I mean, that's just a race that if you want to go back and watch it, you can say what you will about it. I think it's clear to anybody who views that race that she could have won that day, but her rider just didn't really ask her to win, just kind of let her get way too far back, and she was flying at the end, but literally sort of jumped in at the quarter pole. That's the only time that Jose Ortiz got serious about winning that race. So, I mean, she's a little better than some of her results indicate. My one reservation with the last race, even though I'm a fan of this horse, Craig, is that even though the pace was really fast, it kind of held together anyway. The horse that won the race was ahead of her early. The third place finisher was fourth most of the way. So it's not like there was any closing going on. It's not a race that she beat the race flow, but I still think it was a solid overall performance and that the horses that finished around her actually do have some quality. So we'll see. I'd want some of that 10-1 on her or close to it, but I think she's interesting in this race. And I also want to mention the horse drawn to her outside, the number 5, Cecile. She's one who has to get fast. And I know she's a horse that we should also talk about with regard to the pace projector, Craig, because she's shown on the lead on the pace projector in a race that does appear to have a pretty murky pace scenario. It's kind of tough to read, but I know both you and I would be a little surprised if she was actually in front because she only has made one start on the turf, and she came from far, far back to win that day. Part of it was due to the fact that she broke slowly and had some trouble at the break, but just given the way that she won that race, I'd be surprised, especially with Julian Leparoux aboard, if she showed any kind of speed today.
Yeah, I agree. I think the truth is somewhere probably in the middle. I don't expect her to drop back to last like she did last time after a tough start. I don't expect her to be in the front. I do think there's some speed in the race. It's always a little questionable with these NYRA turf races what's actually going to happen when the gate opens, but there are horses in here with real speed. The 7-horse Carry has been running in shorter races, shown plenty of speed. The 6-horse Soviet Express, or Carey, has been running in much shorter races, all sprints. So if she goes, she's almost surely going to show speed. Soviet Express has shown speed at times, and even I'm just kidding. Based off her last race, going when routing, she has the ability to be up pretty close to the pace. So I don't know who's going to be up there, but I expect the pace to at least be average.
Let's move on to race 7. It is a $16,000 claimer going a mile and a 16th on the dirt. It's just a field of 6, Craig, and this is a tough race for the Pick-5 sequence because even though it's a small field, I don't think there's anybody in here that you could have that much confidence in. I mean, maybe you've got a strong opinion in this race. I don't know. We haven't talked about it yet, but it just feels like a tough race to trust the form of anybody, not just because it's a cheaper level, but because these horses generally are kind of inconsistent. So, I mean, it's a little hard to know where to go. I mean, the horse that's maybe coming off the best race is the number 6, Higher Quality, who has won 2 in a row, got the nose victory last time, just 8 days ago for the trainer Jamie Begg, who I think was deputizing for Rob Atras. It's like it was a claim by Rob Atras, but he's on suspension right now. So Jamie Begg is, training the Rob Atras horses while he's on suspension. So got the job done for that barn that day, but now he's first off the claim for Naipaul Chatterpaul, who can win with some long shots, but just not known as a barn that has a whole lot of success off the claim. So, I mean, I kind of have to view that horse with a little bit of skepticism. And I mean, as you go through the others one by one, it's just hard to have a whole lot of confidence in anybody.
Yeah, and I don't. I didn't have any strong opinion in this race. It's a race where I won't use all, but I'll probably use 3 or 4 in here. I guess the one I'd start with would be Jalen Journey. He's a horse who's just, for the most of his career, has run in much higher class races. He goes to the barn of Glenda Prima, who's not a high profile guy, but he actually does pretty well first off the claim. When you sift through Formulator, you can find quite a few wins on his card. Not like he's a 25% off the claim, but for a pretty low percentage trainer, first off the claim is his best, one of his best stats. If there was a horse I was really against in here, it would probably be Grump's Little Tots, and it's not so much that the horse isn't really a contender, but this is a race we give the no speed label. And of all the horses in here, he has absolutely no speed at all. So I'm not sure how he's going to work out any kind of trip.
Well, I love it, Craig, because Grump's Little Tots was my top pick in this race, it's the kind of race where I feel like you can't have too strong of a conviction about any opinion one way or the other. I mean, I'm sure you're not going to be too shocked if any of these six horses win the race, even Blake B, who I'll get to it a little bit. But the thing about the no speed rating, Craig, and we should elaborate on this a little bit. I think the reason we put the no speed rating in as opposed to favors on or near the lead is because what no speed is saying is that even though there's a dearth of speed in this race, there's no one horse or two horses that typically take advantage of front running tactics are going to be particularly dangerous using that style. As you go through this field, it's hard to find a confirmed front runner. I mean, maybe the number 2 Truculent is the most likely to be in front, but he's a horse that didn't have his typical early speed last time, so I think that's knocking down his early pace rating a little bit. So in a situation like that, I don't want to say that closers have no chance, because the reason we're putting the no speed rating is because we're saying it's unclear which running style is really going to be advantaged in this race. And the one thing I'll say about Grump's Little Tots is he was in a race that was lacking much pace last time, and he actually was able to sit much closer to the early lead than he typically does in races that feature larger fields or faster paces. And that was by far the best race that he's run in any of his recent starts. I think just because he didn't get so discouraged and he was able to be more engaged in the early stages of that race. And Jaime Torres or Jamie Torres, who was on him that day, he's a rider, an apprentice who typically is more aggressive with his mounts, and he had him more forward that day. And I think it's going to be a similar game plan once again. And a horse like this, who has a lot of back class, sometimes getting that confidence boost to be competitive again can sort of turn the light bulb back on. And I wonder if that maybe happened with Grump's Little Tots. I like Charlton Baker. I think he does a great job and under the radar trainer. So I just think Grump's Little Tots is coming off a good effort and the one that I want to trust the most in this race, but I get having the negative view.
Yeah, I mean, I get your point. I really do. You're dead right about the no speed flag that we put on the PPs. It's exactly for the reason you said. And that's why for me these races are so perplexing, and I'm going to go kind of deep in here. I guess the thought would be to try to find the horse who's going to be on the lead and maybe think they could steal it, but for me it's just so hard to even figure out who it would be. Maybe it would be Truculent, maybe it would be Blake B, who's done a little bit of running on the lead, but I don't see how you could have any faith that those two could see the job out, because it's not like they are win machines or have any kind of speed figure edge. So yeah, this is a race where heck, maybe I will use them all, because I'm not going in very deep in a lot of the other legs, and I just don't have any strong opinions. I guess maybe I'd lean a little heavier on Jalen Journey, thinking he could just get it done. But he's also coming out of a good barn in Rob Atras, who does well and wasn't able to do much with these. So I'm on your side, really. I just have no strong opinion and just hope to get through this lake.
Yeah, I mean, my strategy in this race is to lean towards three runners and kind of lean against the three others. The three that I would be most inclined to use are Grump's Little Tots and Cool Quartet, who are coming out of the same race. Not that it was a particularly strong 12-5 claimer, but I just kind of trust the form of those two more than some others in here. I don't trust higher quality. I don't trust Jalen Journey, although I get what you're saying about him. Those horses that are claimed from Lynn Cash, and Lynn Cash had him just before Rob Atras, they sometimes don't go on. And the fact that he didn't improve for Atras, and then now he's in a new barn, I just have some reservations about him. And Truculent's just going to take money because Irad Ortiz is riding, and it's not like he's got some big edge on this race, and he's claimed away from Linda Rice. So I don't know if you want to be claiming anybody from Linda Rice these days. So that kind of leaves me with one more horse to talk about, and that's Blake B, who, it's not my top pick, but he's one that I would lean towards including in this race. I know that his recent form is poor, but I mean, he is taking the biggest class drop of anybody in here. I mean, you can just see it looking at his TimeformUS race ratings. I mean, he's been in a series of races where he's been in 100 plus TimeformUS race ratings, a series of triple digit numbers, and now he's dropping into a race that has a race rating of just 96. So I mean, he's getting significant class relief. You can see it in the claiming tag prices too, and he's a horse that on occasion has shown up with a big effort before. It's kind of random, hard to predict, but he's going to be a big price this time, has a live rider on his back, so he's one that I've got to include somewhere.
Yeah, if somebody's going to steal the race on the front end, I think it would be him. I think he's faster than Truculent. We show him with a narrow edge on the pace projector, but I think it's probably more than that. Truculent, when he's up near the front, has a lot of blue fractions. Blake B's been up there even 2 races back in red fractions, so he would definitely be on my tickets as well.
Let's move on to race 8. It is an N1X allowance race going 1.25 miles on the inner turf for the older horses, and feels like a little bit of deja vu, Craig. I think we talked about a few of these horses a few weeks ago when some of them ran, or at least one of them ran, and I think one of them got scratched. Different situation this day, and it's a deeper race than I think we talked about when we last discussed an N1X allowance race going these longer distance at the level. This race, it's a tough one because I wouldn't say that anybody fits this race perfectly. It's not like anybody has a lot of strong experience at the N1X level, or at least consistent experience. You've got some horses that are dropping in class, some horses that are moving up in class out of starter races, some out of a maiden race. It's tough to really gauge the form because most of them haven't run against each other, and it's hard to know who really fits at the level.
Yeah, this is not your typical 1.25 mile race where you get a lot of horses who have run the distance, maybe had some success. It was hard to find in here, so I actually, for me, I just narrowed this down to a couple horses, and they're the 2 horses on the outside. The one is Mosey, who we spent a lot of time talking about the last time he was entered, only for him to be a vet scratch that day. Um, but all the same stuff still applies. He's been away for a very long time. He moves to the barn at Christophe Clement. He seems pretty intent on running him in these longer races, so I'm assuming there's a reason for that. And hopefully our listeners can remember all the things we said then, because there's just a lot to like about him, I think, in a field that doesn't have a whole lot going on or to get excited about. I don't want to totally dismiss the horse who you have as the morning line favorite, Pioneering Spirit. Just he's been so good since he moved to turf. He's obviously stepping up in class. It's a pretty major step up on paper, but when you look at the rest of the field, it's just not that big of a deal to me. He's won his races so easy, even though his speed figures are a little inferior. I don't see why he couldn't take another step forward if he gets into a bit more of a tussle, and I just like what I've seen from him in his 2 turf races. Of the lower prices, the one horse I don't want any parts of is the one horse So High. I know he's coming out of some better races. He ran in the Manhattan last time where he obviously had no chance against a horse like Up to the Mark. But as I scroll through his PPs, he's just a horse who is always backing up in the stretch, which is just not a good sign on turf. He's run some good races in the past, but I just don't see it. I know he has somewhat of a class edge on some of these, but he's going to take a lot of money, and I'm not interested in him at all.
Yeah, I'll just kind of recap the points that we made about Mosey when he was entered in that May 27th race. As you said, he was a vet scratch that day. I don't know the exact reason, but I mean, he worked right after that, has been working steadily up to this race, so I'm assuming all is well with him. He is a horse who was for these same owners, but in different trainers' barns when he was a 2-year-old. Made a couple starts on dirt, just didn't look like that was the surface for him. When he was with Tom Amoss, finally got on turf at the end of his 2-year-old season in December of 2021 and only won that race by a neck, just getting an 87 TimeformUS speed figure. But when you go back and watch that race, this is a rangy horse with a long stride, just looks like one that was just getting started going that 1.16 distance. So I can easily understand why they're running him 1.25 miles now off the layoff, and was even entered going 1.375 in that race that he was scratched out of at the end of May. And furthermore, when you go and look back at that maiden race that he won at Fairgrounds in December over well over a year ago, that was a much stronger maiden race than the speed figure sort of captures. And not that the speed figure is wrong, but that's just a race where a lot of horses subsequently improved out of. I mean, you'll notice the name of the third place finisher, Verstappen, who has since won graded stakes on the turf, and I think even competitive in some graded stakes on synthetic. So, I mean, that's a really good horse, and there are others that have done well out of that race. So I think Mosey beat a stronger field than it might appear, just based on his physicality and the pedigree. I think he's in the right kind of spot. And one other thing I noticed about him when he was training up to that May race initially is Christophe Clement had paired him in workouts, or at least one workout at Payson on the turf, with Soldier Rising, arguably the best turf horse in his barn right now, who was recently second in the Grade 1 Manhattan. So, I mean, there are some reasons to think that Mosey is pretty live in this race, and I have no idea what kind of price he's going to be, and we talked about this on the podcast the last time he ran. He's kind of a hard horse to peg from a morning line perspective, but he's one that I definitely have interest in if he finally makes it to the starting gate on Saturday. I would be taking more of the negative view on the other horse you mentioned, Craig, the number 7 Pioneering Spirit. He's looked great in each of his last 2 races, visually impressive, overcoming wide trips in each of those spots. But gosh, I mean, he's not beating good horses, especially in the maiden claiming race 2 back, and then last time, just not the strongest field. Now, in fairness, this is not a vintage N1X allowance race, so maybe he's just catching another weak spot, and based on the way he runs, 1.25 miles doesn't feel like it's going to be a big issue for him. Maybe he's even going to be better going this distance, but he's just going out for these connections in a race where there's not a whole lot of reliable form. This horse is going to be a short price, even though he probably has to run the fastest speed figure of his career, and for me, those horses just generally are bad value, but so I get that he's one of the likely winners of this race. He's just not one that I really have any interest in betting in this spot. As for So High, who's I got as a similar price on the morning line, drawn down towards the inside. I mean, if you just erased the trainers' names and the horses' names and looked at the data, I mean, he's a complete standout in this field. And I hear you with regard to him sort of losing ground at the end of his races and maybe just getting dragged along by running against superior company in spots where he looks overmatched, but it's not like he ran that badly in the Manhattan. I mean, he beat home a horse like Rock Emperor, who would probably be 1-5 against a field like this. And I mean, he was in the mix until the 8th pole that day before up to the mark sort of ran away from the entire field. His race prior to that was an N1X that was tougher than this one, won by Easter, who's a pretty good horse who just won the other day at Belmont. I mean, he's got other races at this level that make him very competitive. The 1.25 miles, clearly no issue for him. So I know you just kind of assume or want to assume that horses like this are always going to find one better than them. I mean, he doesn't have that winning profile, but in this field, I just can't get past the idea that he fits so well. And if he's a similar price to Pioneering Spirit, I'd rather take the horse that actually has the races that says he can win a race like this. So I'd lean more towards So High. There are some others at bigger prices that you can make cases for, Craig, but I mean, it's just a weird race because there's not the proven form at the distance and not the proven N1X allowance form on this circuit that you can really point to.
Oh, it was another baffling race. Not quite as baffling as the last one we talked about on the dirt, but I hear you on So High. He's not for me. So we'll just have to agree to disagree on this one. We'll see. I won't be shocked if he wins, but I just don't see any value on him, similar to how you don't see it on Pioneering Spirit. As for the others, it was hard for me to latch on to any of them. I guess somebody could make a case for others. There are some horses with speed figures that look competitive, but none of them did it for me.
Yeah, I want to ask you about one more horse, Craig, that I do want to include somewhere, and that's the number 5 Basso, who is one of these horses that has a really weird profile. I mean, he started out as a sprinter on the dirt and the turf. He gradually stretched out. I mean, he's got this 2-mile race, and it's not a jump race. It's a 2-mile flat race, or I guess flat-ish, at Fair Hill last year, or Far Hills, I should say, in New Jersey last year in October. That's the meet where they run the Grand National at Far Hills in the fall. And I mean, he was second to Agitaire, who's who's a pretty good horse. He ran in some stakes races last year as one that can be really rank at times and tough to ride. But I mean, Basso was second going 2 miles in a race that's kind of legit. I mean, he finished ahead of Cross Border that day, who's got plenty of graded stakes for him. And I mean, after that, I mean, they ran him in a synthetic race. He didn't run well. I don't know what to make of that. His last race at Monmouth, though, Craig, is one that I want to mention because that race featured a suicidal early pace. And the winner was pretty close to a King Max, but that feels like a horse that might have stakes in his future. That's a good horse that ran at Monmouth last time. And I mean, Basso faded at the end of that race, but I don't know, maybe 1.25 miles is kind of the happy medium for him. I mean, he's another tough call in this field.
Yeah, I would have been more interested in him if not for the presence of the four fighter in the win. Just because they both seem like speed horses that do their best running when they're on the front end. And I can just envision a scenario where both of them go too fast. Of the two, I would much prefer Basso, but I also have some questions about the way he's campaigned. He just seems kind of all over the place. And I always wonder, I mean, it's not like Greg Sacco doesn't win races. He wins plenty, but it seems like he's kind of trying to figure this horse out too. I mean, he runs on dirt, turf, marathons. He's running turf sprints or off the turf sprints. So I just don't think the connections even know what to do with this guy.
Yeah, he's just such a weird horse in the race, and I feel like he's going to be a price, so I want to use him somewhere. And this is that kind of race where I think you want to keep an open mind with regard to price. And I mean, if horses like Pioneering Spirit and So High are 2-1 and 5-2, maybe you want to start to look elsewhere because it just feels like a race that's a little more wide open than that, at least to me. Mosey, in my opinion, might just be better than this field if we're kind of right about the way he's coming into this race and his prior form and overall potential. So, I mean, I don't think he's going to be vying for favoritism. So Mosey is a horse that I want to sort of use strongly regardless. But some of the other prices, I mean, there's nobody that I would just totally write off in this race. I mean, Hold the Salsa is the biggest price on my morning line, and he ran okay last time in a marathon race. And even Tis a Giant, number 3, he had a trip last time. I mean, it was wide every step of the way. That's a race I would not hold against him. I wish he had sort of prior form that could make me get more interested in him, but I mean, this is just a race where I think you want to survey the board if you're playing it intra-race, sort of outside of that Pick-5 sequence, and just sort of go for the best value. But from a Pick-5 standpoint, not easy.
Oh, it's not because yeah, as you said, it's not just murky handicapping wise. The morning line, I imagine you spent more time on this than usual because I have no idea what these horses are going to go off at, and a lot of that's because of Mosey.
No, yeah, it's a low confidence morning line is how I would phrase it. It's just tough to really know how the public's going to approach that race. I think things get a little easier to read as we move on to the ninth race, Craig, which is an optional claiming 80,000 is an allowance condition also in this race, going a mile on the main track for the fillies and mares, and I think 4 of the 6 are in for the allowance condition, just 2 running for the $80,000 tag. We've got some clearly defined favorites here, some runners that have prior stakes experience. I think leading that charge is the number 2, Gerrymander. And at her best, she's going to win this race, Craig. I don't think there's any question about that. If she breaks her form from when she won the Mother Goose last year, everyone's probably running for second. I think you just have to sort of wonder where she's at this point in time. She's now making her 3rd start as a 4-year-old, maybe needed a race off the layoff, and she did run pretty well last time in the Ruffian against a couple of horses that are probably just better than she is, Past the Champagne and Idiomatic, who are both in great form right now. She's way the horse to beat in my book, but she's just a horse that I don't fully trust.
We understand that, but in this spot, I'm going to trust her just because I'm spreading in some of the other legs, and I didn't really have any other horses that I saw who I thought could beat her. I mean, I guess second choice on the morning line, Venti Valentine. Some people might want to lean that way, and she had a good 3-year-old season. I remember she won one of the early Kentucky Oaks preps, and she didn't really move on though speed figure wise. She just kind of kept running the same speed figures even when she closed out her year in that New York bred stakes win. She came back and to me she didn't run very well. I guess you could give her an excuse as it was just a prep race for her. But she was on the lead in very slow fractions, gave it up against some pretty decent New York breds, but just none as good as Gerrymander. And she would have to improve to a lifetime best to beat that one. I mean, Gerrymander ran a 113 last time, which got near her lifetime top. I expect her to maybe even improve a little bit more. As you noted, that race was pretty strong. Past the Champagne is in really good form. The runner-up, Idiomatic, came back with a huge effort, ran a 120 something speed figure when she won her race next time out. So I just think Gerrymander is in for a confidence builder, and personally, I think she's probably going to get it. The other horse you have low on the morning line, Movie Moxie, the six horse. She's fine, but this just seems like a huge step up in class to me. Maybe she'll burn me. It's Linda Wright's horse. I tend to underrate her horses quite a bit as they seem to win when I don't expect it, but this just seems like an awful big jump up to me.
Yeah, I think really it just comes down to whether or not Gerrymander shows up with her best. Because if she does, she's going to win this race. It's just she. I'm a little concerned, Craig, about the presence of the number 3 Icy Stare Down, who is the other Linda Rice horse in this race. And when Linda has two, if they both start, it feels like Icy Stare Down is probably going to be on a mission here. She's a horse whose only real chance is to get to the lead. And not that Gerrymander needs the lead, but watching her last couple of races, she's just looked a little headstrong and keen. And Joel Rosario is the kind of rider that will take any opportunity to rate a horse. And I mean, if he rips her off the pace, I don't want to see him just try to get into a fight with Gerrymander just to let that cheap speed go. And, look, I'm a huge fan of Joel Rosario, but I mean, it has to be stated that he is not having a great 2023. And, just to kind of put some numbers behind it, I was recently looking up some jockey ROIs for New York jockeys. And then I saw something that really surprised me and I expanded it to the entire nation. And I think it's either of the top 50 or 100 riders in the country. Joel has the lowest ROI in 2023, which is just shocking to me. But I mean, it just kind of speaks to the fact that he is really having an off year. And it's just kind of hard to trust him on a short price right now. But I get it. She's like way the horse to beat. Venti Valentine, I kind of agree with everything you said. I mean, she's got some credentials, but she's a little hard to trust at this point. I would go to the number 6 Movie Moxie for kind of the reason that you were sort of coming around to. I mean, she looks a little inferior on paper, but I've just been watching for the past few months. Linda Rice just keeps winning with these kinds of horses. I mean, she just gets them to improve. And I mean, she's got that race 2 back that sort of puts her in the mix. It did come against weaker. Last time out, I don't want to be too hard on her for that loss over the sloppy track because she got guided down to the inside by Jose Ortiz on a day when I really don't think you wanted to be anywhere near the rail, and I think it affected her run. And also, that was a race that was just dominated on the front end by a stablemate who got to control things. So I think Movie Moxie is better than that performance makes it look, and drawing outside is really going to help her because she's a horse that can sometimes have some issues at the start, and sort of going in and getting right out of the gate is probably going to help her, not blowing the start like she sometimes does. So I'm gonna go to her. She's gonna be a better price. I just can't single Gerrymander given my reservations about the trip she might pull.
Yeah, and I mean, I do have her down as a B, where I'm not using Venti Valentine at all. Couldn't really come up with anybody else in here. Anybody else you wanted to give a mention? Because none of them did anything for me.
No. Let's move on to race 10. It's a maiden claiming event, $40,000 for the New York bred fillies and mares going 6 furlongs on the Widener turf course. And we're back to a full field here, Craig. 12 runners signed on for the turf. And it's a pretty wide open affair. I would guess the public might go towards a horse like the number 12 Liner Right on the outside. Note that she's coming out of a 3rd place finish against Open Company. It's also a $40,000 maiden claimer, but she did face a slightly tougher open field last time, so she's now dropping back in against New York breds. It's just a little hard for me to take a horse that has such little early speed, trying to come from the back, drawing a wide post. Not the kind of horse that I really want to take a short price on, but she's a contender. It's a wide open race, though.
It is. I landed on a few in here. I'll talk about the most obvious one first. That's the 3 Dance with a Babe. She was a filly who just had high early speed last time. Ran well, gave it up late, but I think she had some reason to. She has the best speed figure in the field. I don't want to dismiss her, so she'll be on my tickets. That said, I do think there's some other speed in here, and I don't think it's going to be easy. So they actually went in a little bit long. different direction with a much longer price in the 11 horse Lady Banker. She's a horse who moves into the George Weaver barn, who's just been winning a lot of races lately. It's a good move anytime it's first time his barn. He also does well moving horses dirt to turf. So I just think there's a lot to like about Lady Banker in here. I'm ignoring the speed figure she's ran on dirt. She does show early speed. She's shown right up near the front end, but given her post, I wouldn't be surprised if she's laying third or fourth going down the backstretch. And I just expect a much improved effort from her. She would be my A pick in here. A couple others I would talk about. You already mentioned the 12. Um, Not a big fan. I could see her winning this race if things got heated, so I don't want to totally throw her out, but she'd be more like a C type because she is going to take some money. The other one I would maybe be interested in is the 5 Purist Performance, just given she's a second time starter. I don't think she ran terribly first time out. I mean, her speed figure isn't far off of Dance with Me Babe, who, I already mentioned. And, she could improve. She has a little bit of an excuse comment line. When you go back and watch the replay, there wasn't much there. I don't think it says she hit the gate. Maybe she did, but it didn't seem to affect her very much at all. But she hung in pretty well. She has kind of a weird looking running line where she was dropping back in lengths and was coming on again at the end. I think that was more a factor of the race just kind of really slowing down late. But she kept running, so I'm okay with her as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch upon the horse that you mentioned first. I mean, Lady Banker. Look, you could do a lot worse than just blindly betting every George Weaver horse right now because they are running, especially among the 2-year-olds, but really everything in a stable. I mean, just performing above what you would see on the form. And look, I don't really get Lady Banker as a turf horse. I don't see the turf pedigree there. But like you said, George Weaver has had some success with these horses in the past. So I'm not going to knock a price like that. And she's got an aggressive rider aboard. So there are a few horses coming out of that May 18th race won by Queens over threes. You mentioned Dance With Me Babe, who I agree ran pretty well, setting what was an honest pace. I didn't think Purist Performance really did a whole lot of running in that race, but it was just her debut, so I guess she can improve. Posiliquent, the number 2, is a horse that sort of got too far back in the early stages, but was really running at the end of that race, sort of finished with more left in the tank than she really should have. It could have been a little bit of an optical illusion because, as you said, the race was kind of coming together at the end. The whole field was compressing as they came onto the wire. So in races like that, I sort of wonder how strong it really is overall when everybody finishes so closely packed at the wire. But if I was going to take anybody out of that race, it would probably be the number 2, Posiliquent, and we'll just see if she gets a little more pace to close into this time. But I more wanted to lean in different directions, just horses not coming out of that race. The number 7, Lakeside Getaway, is a horse that I'll admit I was wrong about because I liked her in some tougher spots recently and she just wasn't good enough. But I think she's just getting class relief here that she really needs. She was competing in much tougher maiden special weight races the last couple times. The horses that beat her, like Snowy Evening and Weekend Rags, Loon Cry, they're just so much better than the competition that's in this race. And going back to the 6 furlongs, also probably going to be a benefit to her. So I just think Lakeside Getaway makes a whole lot of sense. She's not some clever, huge price or anything, but I just think she's one of the more likely winners of this race. And then a horse that is, I think, going to be a bigger price that I would make my top pick just from a value standpoint is the number 4, Mo de Morning Grouch. Going back to last year, she's got some turf races that are okay. There's that second place finish at this level at Saratoga, where she got a speed figure that makes her very competitive here. Then the time after that at Aqueduct, she was chasing an extremely fast pace and going wide on the turn. That was another race that just totally fell apart at the end, but she got the wrong trip that day, chasing outside. And then she came off the layoff last time, still in the Linda Rice barn at this level. But again, just got one of those trips from Jose Ortiz where it felt like he wasn't really serious about winning the race. It just was sort of out of position early, no urgency on the backstretch. She went wide into the turn, followed a horse that was going backwards and sort of made no attempt to go around that horse while just kind of taking Mo de Morning Grouch in hand and got her to the outside in the stretch, but just had way too much ground to make up at that point and kind of just rode her lightly through the lane. I guess it's the owners have transferred these horses to Pat Reynolds now from the Linda Rice barn, so I don't know what to make of that. But I think that is going to help the price a little bit because I just don't think she's going to take as much money not going out for Linda Rice. Getting your rider switched to Dylan Davis, I don't care that much. And I just think she's got competitive races, is drawn better here, and is going to be a big price in this race, so she'd be my top pick.
Yeah, I've got no problem with her. I was going to mention her as well when you came back. I was hoping you'd mention Pasiliquint just because of the name. I actually went and watched the replay to see how Johnny I did it. He said it the same as you, but I figured I'd still mess it up. But yeah, I don't have any problem with those. Lakeside Gateway, I'm not as interested in, and it's kind of funny. It's because of what you mentioned with Gerrymander. I can just when I tried to make a case for this horse in my head, all I could picture was Joel Rosario dropping back to last in a turf sprint, sitting on the rail, and somehow getting stuffed. Maybe I'm trying to be a little too much Nostradamus, but it just seems like that's a trip this horse is destined to get, and I just don't have a lot of faith in Joel right now in a race where he's probably going to have to do some riding and some maneuvering. So no real issues with anybody you picked other than I just don't see her getting to the wire.
Well, that concludes our handicapping of this pick five. Let's just sort of do a little bit of a review, go through, repeat some of the horses that we want to use throughout this sequence. It's not the easiest one to put a ticket together, especially with regard to that seventh race, that claiming event that's a small field retreat where you have to make some decisions. I'll let you go first, Craig.
Gee, thanks. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, that's fine. Speaking of I'm just kidding, that's a horse I'm going to lean on at a price in the Wild Applause. She would be my A horse in there, along with probably tax implications. I think both of them have a better shot than a couple horses who are going to take some money as well. And I also want to use Cecile, the five horse. We didn't talk about her as much as we did on the race preview, but I fully expect her to run a much better speed figure than we saw even winning last time, where she had a bit of a tough trip, be more forwardly placed. So I don't want to get knocked out if she were to win. The seventh race, the claiming race, even the horse I didn't want to like, you kind of talked me into, Grump's Little Tots. It's a race where I'm going to spread. I almost never use the all button, but that's a case where I probably will use the all button. In the turf allowance, the eighth race at non-winners of one, I'm just using two horses, Mosey and Pioneering Spirit. I'm going to hope to get through it. I know there's a lot of different directions you can go, but it's not a ticket that I want to spend hundreds of dollars on. So I'm going to limit it there because they're by far, to me, the two most likely winners. In the ninth, I'm going to put most of my play through Gerrymander. I just think she's better than everybody in here. But I will save a little room for Movie Moxie as more of a BC type. And then the last race, I do like that George Weaver horse. First time in his barn, first time turf. He's been running well, but I'll use some others as well, including the 2, the 3, the 5, and there was one other one. Oh, maybe a little bit of the 12, just because I could see a scenario where this race fell apart.
Yeah, we pretty much agree on everything in the Wild Applause to kick it off. I also like I'm Just Kidding, and yeah, I wanted to do the same thing as you, Craig. We kind of finished up Cecile a little quickly, but she really was flying at the end of that maiden victory at Churchill Downs last time. It got a poor start that day. She might be a horse that has taken a huge step forward on the turf, so feels like another one that could be a decent price in this race. So I also would want to use her. And of the logicals, I much prefer tax implications to Liguria and Breath Away. So it would be mostly 2, 4, 5 for me in that Wild Applause. In the seventh race, Grump's Little Tots is my slight lean, but I would use also Cool Quartet and Blake B. I want to let horses like Truculent and Jalen Journey beat me, and if I can afford it, maybe I'll put higher quality on the ticket just because I guess he can win off the claim. I mean, he's kind of running on the prior Barnes training here, coming back on such short rest, but that's a really tough leg to wrap your head around. The eighth race, Mosey is my top pick. If I didn't make that clear before, Craig and I pretty much agree on him. I think there's a chance he might just be better than this field if we're right about him. And I would use So High. I just think he's got such a class edge over this field. I can't ignore it. And on deeper tickets, I would use a little bit of Basso and maybe even Tis a Giant. But my main take on this race is that I want to try to beat Pioneering Spirit because I just think he's going to take a lot of money off the win streak, and this is a much tougher race. In the ninth race, Gerrymander's way the horse to beat. I would use her and Movie Moxie and just not try to overcomplicate it going too deep in there. And then we'll close things out with that maiden claimer finale. I like Mo de Morning Grouch. She's going to be a price here, I believe. And I think her last couple of races are a lot better than they look, and she's going to get somewhat ignored. And I also want to use the number 7 Lakeside Getaway, who is not as good as I thought she was, but is just dropping to a spot where I think she makes a lot of sense against a field where I'm not sure that there's a ton of quality in this race.
All I have to say is in the background, I have Royal Ascot going as we record this, and they just ran a 33 horse field. So let's just be glad we didn't have to handicap any of those.
Yeah, I guess we should appreciate that 6-horse, $16,000 claiming. We can't finish worse than 6th, Craig. Well, everybody, hopefully we gave out some good ideas on this forecast this week, and hopefully these races stay on the turf so they don't get decimated by scratches, but it's always a possibility when you've got those thunderstorms predicted, but we'll cross our fingers that everything stays dry through the weekend. Well, Craig, this is going to be my last podcast with you for the next week or so. I'll be going on vacation, and I kind of hope you take the next week off of the podcast just to focus on other stuff, but we'll definitely be back together in early July. I know by that Stars and Stripes card that they run at Belmont Park. I always think that's a weird name because it's the week after 4th of July weekend, but that weekend they run the Belmont Derby, the Belmont Oaks, and some other top races. I think that's the Saturday, July 9th card, I want to say, or 10th. I forget which day it is, but we'll definitely be back together to do the forecast for that card, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I am going to take next week off. I'll certainly post all the figures on the on Twitter like I always do and be active there, but have some extra duties that week as we've talked about. So yeah, I'll just take that part of the week off and we'll do the forecast the week after when you get back. And I hope you have a great time off.
Everybody, thanks for tuning in to the podcast this week. Remember, you can always catch these on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch the return of the TimeformUS Forecast in about 2 weeks' time.